The axe stopped mid-swing. For 3 long years, Caleb Boone had never once hesitated. Not when felling pines as thick as wagon wheels, not when splitting oak logs till his palms bled raw, not even when storms tore through Broken Arrow Ridge and the mountain winds screamed like 1,000 dying souls. But now, the weight of the axe hung frozen in his hands as his gaze locked on 2 small figures at the edge of his clearing. Children. A boy and a girl, no older than 8, barefoot and wild-looking, as though the forest itself had birthed them. Their clothes were torn and smeared with dirt, their tangled hair threaded with pine needles, their faces streaked with dried tears. They stood perfectly still, clutching a small leather pouch between them, steam curling softly from its seams. Whatever lay inside, they held it as if their entire lives depended on it. Caleb lowered the axe slowly, his voice rough from disuse. "Where'd you 2 come from?" The boy said nothing, only tightened his grip on the pouch. The girl stepped half a pace forward, enough for Caleb to see her trembling chin and the thin line of blood where she'd bitten her lip too hard. And then she spoke. Quiet but steady, her words sharp as a blade. "We know what you did to our father." The clearing went silent. Somewhere in the distance, a hawk cried, but here, among the whispering pines, only Caleb's heartbeat roared in his ears. He didn't know these children, didn't recognize their faces, their voices. Yet their words struck something deep and raw. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. The girl's dark eyes burned, locking him in place, holding him as surely as a rope around his neck. And then another sound reached him, faint at first, but growing clearer with each breath. Hoofbeats. 1 horse, maybe more, closing in fast. Caleb Boone had built his life on silence. 3 years ago, he'd walked away from everything. From the wars, the people, and the memories that clung like mud to his boots. Broken Arrow Ridge had become his refuge, a forgotten stretch of land where pine trees whispered their secrets, and no one came looking for answers. Out here, a man could vanish without leaving more than a shadow behind. He'd chosen a spot halfway up the slopes, where the river curved around a rocky rise and the nearest settlement was a full day's ride away. No friends, no neighbors, no questions. His days were carved into a rhythm as steady as his heartbeat. Before dawn, he split logs until his shoulders burned and the calluses on his hands deepened. By mid-morning, he hunted along the ridges or checked his traps, speaking only to the crows that circled above. At sundown, he returned to his cabin, a simple thing built from rough-hewn logs, and sat by the fire without lighting a lamp. The darkness didn't bother him, suited him. People whispered his name once, back when the world still knew him. Caleb Boone, the soldier who'd seen too much blood. Some called him a hero, others called him a killer. He didn't argue either way. Truth was, after the war ended, Caleb didn't know what he was anymore. Some nights, when the wind howled hard enough to rattle the shutters, fragments of the past clawed their way back. He saw smoke thick as tar, heard the screams of men dying under a black sky, smelled the scorched powder that clung to his clothes. Faces blurred together. Allies, enemies, innocents. Sometimes he wondered if there was even a difference anymore. That was why he'd come here, to disappear, to let the mountains swallow what was left of him. And for 3 years it had worked. He had one rule. Swing until sundown, trust no one, speak to no one. The forest became his confessional. The creak of his axe the only prayer he still remembered. There were no ghosts here, or so he thought, until today. Now, 2 silent children stood in his clearing, clutching a steaming leather pouch and accusing him of a crime he couldn't recall. And with the sound of approaching hoofbeats rolling through the pines, Caleb felt the fragile walls of his exile cracking. He flexed his fingers on the axe handle, fighting the instinct to run. But where would he go? The past had already found him. Somewhere deep in his mind, a memory stirred, faint, fractured, like sunlight through fog. A man's face, dark braids, painted markings across his cheeks. A night lit by fire. Words whispered so urgently he couldn't quite hear them. And then water. Cold, black water swallowing the world. Caleb clenched his jaw and forced the image away, but the scar along his neck burned like a hot brand. Who were these children? Who was their father? And what in God's name did they think he'd done? The hoofbeats grew louder. Whoever was coming would be here within moments. Caleb set the axe down gently against the stump and straightened, his muscles taut, senses sharp. For the first time in 3 years, the quiet life he'd built was about to shatter, and he knew there was no stopping it. The twins couldn't have been more than 8 years old. Up close, they looked even smaller, like the wilderness itself had been gnawing at them for days. Their clothes were torn, threadbare deerskin worn down to thin patches, and their bare feet were cracked and blistered from miles of running. Dirt streaked their faces, but beneath the grime Caleb could see high cheekbones and sharp features, the same shape of jaw, the same stubborn set to the chin. Family resemblance. They didn't move when he stepped toward them, though the boy flinched ever so slightly, shifting his weight closer to his sister. His small hands clutched the leather pouch as though letting go of it would mean losing everything. Caleb noticed the steam again, curling faintly from the seams like ghostly breath, and his unease deepened. Whatever lay inside wasn't gold or coin, and yet it was precious beyond measure. Before Caleb could say another word, the girl's head snapped toward the forest behind them. Her body went rigid, her lips forming a silent shape he barely caught. He's coming. Caleb turned. The hoofbeats he'd heard moments ago were louder now, no longer distant echoes but the pounding rhythm of a horse closing fast. Birds scattered from the trees in sudden bursts, cawing into the sky, and within seconds a rider broke through the shadows beneath the pines. Charles Grayson. Caleb recognized him instantly, though he'd hoped never to see the man again. Grayson was a merchant by trade, but anyone who had lived near Broken Arrow Ridge long enough knew his business was rot down to the roots. He dealt in claims and contracts, buying up land through trickery or force. If he smiled at you, it was only because he was measuring your worth in dollars. The man reined in his horse hard enough to spray dirt over the clearing and swung himself down in one smooth motion. His fine coat was dusted with trail grit, his boots polished but scarred from use, and his left hand rested casually on the butt of his pistol. A thin, oily grin slid across his face as his eyes swept the clearing, pausing on Caleb before shifting to the children. "Well now," Grayson drawled, his voice like a snake coiling through the grass. "If this ain't a sight." Caleb Boone, the hermit of Broken Arrow Ridge himself. "Didn't think you much cared for visitors." Caleb didn't reply. Grayson's gaze flicked to the leather pouch. The grin widened, but the smile never reached his cold gray eyes. "I'm looking for 2 little thieves," he said smoothly, tilting his head toward the twins. "Ran off with something that doesn't belong to them. You wouldn't have seen anyone wandering through here, would you?" Caleb's jaw tightened, but he stayed silent. He didn't trust himself to speak yet, not when he didn't even understand what was happening. The boy stepped back instinctively, clutching the pouch tighter, and that small movement made Grayson's expression shift. He chuckled low, dangerous, and shook his head slowly. "You know, Boone, I heard a thing or two about you," he said, circling slightly as if sizing him up. "Quiet man, keeps to himself. But folks say you've got history. Folks say you've spilled blood before. So I'm gonna ask you nice, just once." His boots stopped inches from the children. "Hand them over." Caleb looked at the twins, the girl standing firm though her lip trembled, the boy half hidden behind her, both holding on to that pouch like it was their last tether to the world. They weren't thieves. Not the way Grayson meant it. He didn't know how he knew, but he did. He finally spoke, his voice low and rough, like gravel grinding under a wagon wheel. "Even if I had," Caleb said, "you'd never touch them." Grayson laughed softly, but there was no humor in it. "You don't even know what's in that bag, Boone. You don't know what they've done, or what you've done." Caleb frowned. "What's that supposed to mean?" The merchant's grin turned sharp as broken glass. "Your hands are already bloody with their father's death," Grayson hissed. "You might as well finish what you started." The words struck like a whip. Caleb froze, his pulse hammering, his breath catching in his throat. He opened his mouth to deny it, but something stopped him. A faint memory, fractured and blurred, stirring deep inside his mind. A face half-lit by firelight. A voice pleading. The weight of cold water. He didn't remember killing anyone. And yet his scar burned like someone had pressed a hot brand to his neck. Grayson's hand twitched toward his pistol. Caleb didn't think. Years of muscle memory roared back like a storm breaking loose. He stepped forward hard, knocking Grayson's hand aside before the gun could clear leather. The move was fast, sharp, decisive, the reflex of a man who'd survived battlefields where hesitation meant death. The merchant stumbled back, cursing, his grin finally breaking into something raw and furious. And just as Caleb shifted his stance, ready for what came next, something else stirred at the edge of the clearing. Movement, shadows, dozens of them. Shapes emerged silently from the tree line, one after another, until the forest floor seemed alive with motion. A dozen figures stepped into view, men and women alike, painted with ochre and ash, bows raised, arrows tipped with stone heads that glimmered in the fading light. And at their head walked a woman unlike any Caleb had ever seen. Tall, proud, silver streaking through her long dark hair, her gaze hard as storm clouds over the prairie. A necklace of carved bone rested against her chest, and she carried herself with the kind of quiet authority that didn't need steel to make itself known. Her eyes settled on the twins, then on Caleb, finally on Grayson. When she spoke, her voice was calm but carried the weight of mountains. "My name is Ayanna Red Hawk," she said. "Jacob Red Hawk was my brother. These are his children." The clearing held its breath. Grayson spat into the dirt. "Then you know damn well that mine belongs to me," he snapped. "And those brats are holding the map to it. Hand them over, or I swear you'll regret it." Ayanna didn't move, didn't blink. When she replied, her tone was steady, final, as if the ground itself had chosen her words. "There is no map." Before Caleb could ask what she meant, the girl untied the pouch and tipped it forward. A soft hiss escaped as gray powder spilled into the wind. Ashes. Grayson's face went pale. For the first time, his grin was gone. "You fools," he whispered, his voice cold and low. "You just started a war." Caleb stood rooted to the spot, watching the ashes spiral into the air. They caught the sunlight as they scattered, tiny gray ghosts dissolving into the wind, and for a heartbeat the clearing seemed frozen in time. The children's small hands trembled as they closed the empty pouch, but their faces were set, as if they had known this moment would come all along. Grayson stared at the drifting ashes, his jaw tight, the veins in his neck standing out like cords. The cold smile returned slowly, twisting into something sharp and venomous. "You think this changes anything?" he said softly, dangerously. "You think dumping his ashes into the dirt is gonna stop me? That land was his, is his, and now it belongs to whoever's got the backbone to take it." Ayanna Red Hawk took one measured step forward. Her warriors shifted with her, bows trained, their silence more threatening than any shout. "That land," she said evenly, "is protected by treaty. It belongs to my people. My brother died keeping it safe." Grayson's laugh was short, ugly, and loud. "Treaty?" he spat. "Paper signed by dead men. Doesn't mean a damn thing when there's silver under the rock. And your precious brother." He jerked his chin toward the pouch. "He died because he trusted the wrong people." Something in Caleb's chest tightened at that, though he didn't yet know why. A flicker of memory, faint but sharp. Jacob Red Hawk's face under firelight, his voice urgent, pleading. Caleb tried to shove it down, but the scar at his neck burned hotter, pulling the pieces together in fragments he couldn't yet make sense of. The girl's small voice cut through the tension, quivering but fierce. "You killed him," she whispered, staring at Grayson. "Father said you would. That's why he made Caleb promise." Caleb's breath caught. "Promise?" Grayson's cold gray eyes swung toward him. "Oh, he promised, all right. You think you ran out here to the wilderness to be a lumberjack?" Boone, his sneer widened. "No. You ran because you couldn't face what you'd done." Caleb's fingers flexed around the axe handle, still leaning against the stump. He didn't know what Grayson was trying to twist, But one thing had settled deep in his gut. These children weren't lying, and whatever secrets lay buried in his past, Grayson had dirt under his nails too. "Last chance, Boone," Grayson said, drawing his pistol with a smooth, practiced motion, aiming it not at Caleb but at the boy. "Step aside." Time slowed. Caleb couldn't think. The axe came up in his hands in one motion, the same way it had 1,000 times before, but this swing wasn't meant for wood. He knocked the pistol hard, sending it spinning into the dirt, and stepped between Grayson and the children. "You'll leave them be," Caleb said, voice low but unyielding. "You'll leave this land, and if you don't—" He let the axe rest against his shoulder, its edge glinting in the light. "You'll find out just how much of my past you don't want waking up." For the first time, Grayson faltered, just for a heartbeat, but it was there. Then his grin returned, thinner, colder. "You think you can scare me, Boone? You think a washed-up soldier with a guilty conscience can stand against me? You don't know the kind of men I have working for me." He whistled sharply. From the trees behind him, more riders appeared, 6 men, armed with rifles slung low, faces shadowed beneath wide-brimmed hats. They dismounted in silence, fanning out behind Grayson like wolves circling prey. Ayanna raised her hand. Instantly, a dozen bows drew tight, arrows aimed at the newcomers' throats. The clearing tensed, one wrong move away from chaos. Caleb's grip on the axe tightened until his knuckles went white. "Easy," he murmured, more to himself than anyone else. Grayson took a step forward, and Ayanna matched him, her warriors moving as one with her. The girl clutched Caleb's sleeve now, the boy's small hand gripping his sister's, both pressing closer to his side. "This doesn't end today," Grayson said softly, menace curling in his tone. "You just picked your side, Boone, and when the dust settles, you'll wish you hadn't." Ayanna's gaze didn't waver. "You've already lost," she said simply. Grayson's nostrils flared. "We'll see." With a curt gesture, he motioned his men back. They retrieved the fallen pistol, mounted their horses, and rode off through the trees, their hoofbeats fading but not gone, like distant thunder promising a storm. The silence that followed was heavier than before, a silence filled with unspoken truths and lingering danger. Caleb exhaled slowly, lowering the axe. He turned to Ayanna, meeting her gaze directly for the first time. "What's in that pouch?" he asked quietly. "And what does any of this have to do with me?" Ayanna studied him, her expression unreadable. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then she glanced at the children, and something softened in her storm-gray eyes. "My brother trusted you," she said finally. "Whatever you promised him, Boone, it's time to remember it, because this fight isn't over, and neither is your part in it." Caleb stared at her, his throat dry, words caught somewhere between memory and denial. He wanted to tell her she was wrong, that he'd come here to disappear, that he wasn't anyone's savior. But when he looked down at the twins, their tiny faces pale and weary, their eyes shining with something fragile and unspoken, he couldn't bring himself to say it. The wind carried the last of Jacob Red Hawk's ashes into the pines. And Caleb Boone, a man who had spent 3 years trying to bury his past, knew with a cold certainty that the past had just dug itself up again. The sun had dipped low, painting the tops of the pines in molten gold, but the clearing still hummed with tension. Grayson's hoofbeats had faded into the distance, yet Caleb knew this was only a lull, not the end. A storm had been set in motion, one he could neither outrun nor ignore. Ayanna Red Hawk remained standing tall, her warriors forming a silent wall behind her. Their bows were still drawn, their movements sharp and disciplined, but her hand lifted slightly, signaling them to lower their weapons. The tension eased, but it did not vanish. Caleb glanced down at the twins. The boy's grip on the leather pouch had loosened now that it held nothing but air, but his knuckles were still pale, the tendons straining with effort. The girl clung to her brother's arm, her chin lifted defiantly, though her small body trembled. Ayanna's gaze followed his. "They've been running for 2 days," she said softly, her voice steady but edged with exhaustion. "No food, no rest. My brother trusted you with their safety, Boone." They found their way here because of that trust. Caleb swallowed hard, unease curling deep in his gut. I don't remember making any promise. Her storm-gray eyes fixed on him. You will. Before he could reply, a sharp whistle sliced through the quiet. One of Ayana's scouts emerged from the tree line at a run, his chest heaving, his breath ragged. He spoke in their tongue, words rapid and urgent. Ayana's expression tightened as she listened. Then she turned toward Caleb. Grayson rides to Grey Hollow, she said. He'll gather his men, maybe more. He won't stop until he gets what he wants. Caleb frowned. Silver, he guessed. Ayana nodded once. The mine. Something stirred deep in Caleb's memory again. Not a full picture, just fragments. Firelight. A map drawn in the dirt. Jacob Red Hawk's voice, low and insistent. Protect the land. Keep them safe. If Grayson gets his hands on it. He clenched his jaw. Every piece of this puzzle seemed to lead back to a promise he couldn't remember making, but his bones told him it was real. Why me? He asked finally, frustration sharpening his tone. Why would Jacob trust me? Ayana stepped closer, her gaze unflinching. Because you were there the night he died. Caleb went rigid, breath caught in his throat. He started to shake his head to deny it. But then the scar along his neck burned like fire, and the words stuck. Before he could find an answer, another sound reached them. Low, distant, rhythmic. Not hoofbeats this time, drums. The warriors turned toward the noise instantly, bows rising again. Ayana raised her hand for silence, her own expression unreadable. Caleb strained his ears, catching the faint, hollow thrum rolling over the hills. The sound was primal, steady, like a heartbeat carried on the wind. What is that? He asked. Ayana's jaw tightened. A call to arms. The girl pressed against Caleb's side, whispering softly. Auntie says when the drums beat, it means the clans are coming together. Caleb exhaled slowly. He understood what that meant even without her saying more. Grayson's greed wasn't just about silver. It was about territory, power, and blood. And now, because of those ashes scattered in the clearing, everything had shifted. This land is sacred, Ayana said, her voice low but firm. Jacob was trying to keep it from being violated. If Grayson spreads lies, if he claims Jacob sold the rights or that we killed him, the settlers will believe him. And when they come, she looked around the clearing, her eyes resting briefly on the twins. They'll come with guns. Caleb rubbed a hand across his face, the weight of it all pressing down on him like the mountain itself. He'd spent 3 years running from trouble, burying his ghosts beneath axe swings and silence. But trouble had found him anyway. One of Ayana's men approached, speaking again in their tongue. She listened, then turned sharply toward Caleb. They've spotted riders, she said. Not Grayson's men. Cavalry. Federal? Caleb asked. She nodded. Too soon for them to be here by chance. Grayson must have called them. Caleb's gut twisted. Federal soldiers meant law, but law bent easily in places where silver glittered beneath the soil. If Grayson got to them first, if he convinced them Jacob Red Hawk had betrayed them, he looked at the twins, their small faces pale beneath smudges of dirt, and felt something settle hard inside him. Whatever part he'd played in Jacob's death, whatever promise he'd made and forgotten, one thing was certain. He wasn't about to abandon these children. Get them inside, Caleb said, nodding toward his cabin. Barricade the door if you have to. Ayana studied him for a long moment. And you? Caleb picked up his axe, testing its weight. I'll slow them down. Before she could argue, he turned toward the tree line, ears straining for the first signs of riders. But before the cavalry appeared, another sound split the air. A sharp, metallic crack. A rifle. The bullet hissed past Caleb's head and tore a chunk of bark from the tree behind him. He dropped low instantly, instinct screaming, scanning the treeline. 3 riders broke through the undergrowth, rifles raised, shouting curses as they charged. Grayson's men. Caleb rolled to the side, grabbed the fallen branch beside him, and hurled it with the strength of a man who'd spent years splitting logs. It struck the first rider square in the chest, knocking him from his horse. Before the others could fire, Ayana's warriors unleashed a volley of arrows from the trees, striking one rider cleanly and forcing the last to retreat. The clearing fell silent again, save for the ragged breaths of the children hiding in the cabin doorway. Caleb's axe dripped with resin and sweat, his heartbeat pounding in his ears. Ayana joined him, her warriors fanning out to secure the area. She said nothing at first, but the weight in her gaze spoke enough. "This was just the start," she said finally. Caleb nodded grimly. "Then we'd better be ready for what's coming." The clearing was tense, every rustle of pine needles, every shadow in the trees, a reminder that danger had not yet passed. Caleb Boone's eyes never left the horizon, where Grayson's riders might appear at any second. The twins huddled together near the cabin, their small bodies rigid with fear and exhaustion, and Ayana Red Hawk's warriors stood poised like statues, bows drawn, eyes scanning for threats. Then, a sudden, unmistakable sound cut through the air. The deep, rhythmic pounding of hooves on the hard forest floor, louder and heavier than Grayson's men could manage. Caleb tensed instinctively, gripping his axe as if it could shield them from whatever came next. Through the pines, a column of federal cavalry emerged, led by a tall, stern man in a blue uniform, brass buttons gleaming in the last rays of sunlight. His hat was low, casting a shadow over sharp eyes that swept the clearing in one practiced sweep. Captain Elias Monroe, known in those parts as a man who demanded justice, not excuses. His troops dismounted swiftly, rifles ready, boots crunching on pine needles. "Charles Grayson," Monroe barked, his voice cutting like a whip. "You are under arrest for illegal mining operations, land encroachment, and obstruction of federal authority. Drop your weapons and surrender." The words hit like thunder. Grayson's jaw dropped. He whipped around, drawing his pistol, but before he could aim, the cavalry surged forward, encircling him. His remaining men dismounted hastily, realizing too late that the law had arrived faster than he anticipated. Ayana lowered her bow, though her eyes remained sharp. "Federal cavalry," she murmured. "Then the truth will finally be heard." Caleb stepped back, heart hammering as the pieces of the past slotted themselves into place. Memories he had tried to bury for 3 years rose with sudden clarity. Firelight, a night on the riverbank, Jacob Red Hawk's voice, urgent and strained. "Caleb, you must act. Fake my death. Make them think I am gone. Keep my children safe. Promise me." And the cold water, the stage drowning, the bloodied ground, the scar on his neck. None of it was murder, it had been a promise. A man's final request, entrusted to him because he was the only one Jacob believed could make it happen. Caleb exhaled slowly, relief and lingering guilt warring in his chest. The weight of 3 years of self-imposed exile lifted, replaced by a fragile sense of purpose restored. He had not killed Jacob Red Hawk. He had protected him. He had kept a promise. Monroe's cavalry secured Grayson and his men, confiscating weapons and evidence. Grayson sputtered and protested, but the captain's eyes were iron, unyielding. "Jacob Red Hawk was a federal informant," Monroe explained, his voice carrying across the clearing. "He worked to prevent illegal mining on protected tribal lands. Mr. Boone was entrusted with ensuring the safety of his children while keeping Mr. Grayson from learning the truth. Any blood on Mr. Boone's hands was a result of the promise he kept, not murder." The twins blinked, the gravity of the revelation settling over them like a blanket. Their small bodies relaxed fractionally, but their hands remained intertwined. The boy's eyes widened as he looked at Caleb, searching for some sign that he understood. The girl's lips parted slightly, an expression caught between awe and relief. Ayana Red Hawk approached, her gaze sweeping over Caleb. "You did exactly what he asked," she said softly, voice filled with respect. "You kept them safe and you kept your word. That is no small thing." Caleb's mouth went dry. Words failed him, but the scar along his neck throbbed as if acknowledging the past had finally been set right. He nodded slowly, glancing down at the twins who now stared at him with trust and something more fragile, hope. The clearing, once fraught with danger and tension, began to feel lighter. The pines whispered around them, carrying away the echoes of Grayson's threats. The ashes of Jacob Red Hawk's body had mingled with the soil and wind, a symbolic cleansing of the past. Monroe turned to Ayanna. "The land will remain protected," he said firmly. "Any further attempts at illegal claims will be met with swift federal action, and the children will be safe under your guardianship." Ayanna nodded. "We will ensure it," she replied, though her eyes lingered on Caleb, an unspoken question in her storm-gray gaze. Where did he fit into the life of these children now that the threat had passed? Caleb lowered his head, closing his eyes for a moment. The axe rested against the stump, silent now, a symbol of the life he had tried to leave behind. But he knew deep down that his path had changed. He had been forced back into the world he tried to escape, not as a soldier, not as a hermit, but as a guardian, a protector, and perhaps, in some small measure, family. The twins finally stepped forward, hesitating only slightly, then pressed close to him. The boy looked up at Caleb, eyes wide and earnest. "You kept your promise," he said softly. "And you kept mine," Caleb replied, voice low, carrying the weight of relief and recognition. The sun sank fully behind the mountains, casting long shadows across the clearing. The wind whispered through the pines, carrying with it the sense of closure. Not complete, not final, but enough to breathe again. Caleb's shoulders relaxed for the first time in 3 years. He looked at the children, then at Ayanna, then at the mountains he had once fled into, and finally understood that his exile had ended not with silence, but with the truth revealed and a promise kept. The law had come, the villains were defeated, and the children were safe. But the future, that was something Caleb would have to build, one careful step at a time. Weeks passed since the cavalry had arrived, since Charles Grayson had been hauled off to a federal cell, cursing under his breath as officers restrained him. Broken Arrow Ridge, once a place of tense silence and shadows, had begun to breathe again. The wind carried a softer sound through the pines, a quiet sigh of relief after months of whispered danger and unrelenting tension. Caleb Boone returned to his cabin with the twins close at his heels. The small wooden structure had not changed. The roof sagged slightly, the logs bore the marks of decades of weather, and the scent of pine and fire lingered like a memory. But the atmosphere had shifted. The air inside felt warmer, less oppressive, carrying the faint sense of possibility that Caleb had not felt in years. The twins explored the cabin cautiously at first. The girl ran her small fingers along the rough-hewn table, eyes wide as if discovering a new world. The boy peered out the window at the ridge beyond, the sunlight catching his dark hair and highlighting the dirt streaks that would soon be washed away. Both children carried themselves with a mixture of wariness and relief, the heavy burden of recent days slowly lifting. Ayanna Red Hawk visited frequently, always accompanied by her warriors. Her presence brought a stabilizing influence, a reminder of the protective circle surrounding the children. She checked in on supplies, teaching the twins small lessons about the land, the forest, and their heritage. Yet, each time she looked at Caleb, there was a question in her storm-gray eyes. How would he fit into this new life? One crisp morning, as the sun rose over the ridge and painted the cabin in gold, the twins approached Caleb with a small envelope. Their hands trembled slightly as they handed it to him. The leather pouch from weeks ago, replaced with paper now dry and sealed. Caleb unfolded it carefully. Inside was a letter, written in familiar, steady handwriting that brought back memories sharp enough to make him catch his breath. Jacob Red Hawk's words leapt from the page, clear and deliberate. "If you are reading this, my children are safe. You gave me the death I needed and them the life I could not. They will need a guardian strong enough to protect them, and a man they can one day call family." Caleb's fingers trembled slightly as he placed the letter against his chest. The words, once distant and mysterious, now struck him with profound weight. He had carried 3 years of guilt, uncertainty, and self-imposed isolation, believing he had failed in a promise he barely remembered. Now the truth was undeniable. He had kept that promise, and the children's lives were testimony to it. He looked at the girl, then the boy. Their eyes, wide and attentive, held a quiet trust he had not allowed himself to hope for. The small hands reached toward his, tentative, seeking connection, seeking the guardian he now understood he had become. The forest around Broken Arrow Ridge seemed to hum with calm. The pines swayed gently in the breeze, birdsong filling the spaces where tension had once lingered. Even the creek nearby gurgled with a renewed clarity, its waters reflecting sunlight like shards of liquid gold. The land itself, once threatened by greed and violence, now held a promise of protection and peace. Caleb folded the letter once more, pressing it into the chest of his shirt, and exhaled. His shoulders, which had borne the invisible weight of guilt and isolation, relaxed for the first time in years. The axe, once an extension of survival and solitude, now leaned quietly against the cabin wall, a reminder of the past, but no longer a symbol of isolation. He stepped to the porch, watching the twins run toward the ridge, laughter bubbling between them, pure and unrestrained for the first time since tragedy had struck. Ayanna watched from the edge of the forest, her figure calm, but her eyes held a quiet approval, a recognition that Caleb had become what Jacob had believed he could be: protector, guardian, and, perhaps, family. The mountains stretched endlessly before him, their peaks bathed in morning light. For years, he had hidden from the world in their shadow, believing solitude would shield him from pain, from responsibility, from the ghosts of past deeds. But now, with the children safe and Grayson defeated, Caleb understood that true strength lay not in isolation, but in the bonds one chose to honor. He whispered softly, a statement meant more for himself than anyone else. Time to come down. The twins paused and turned toward him, eyes bright with anticipation and curiosity. Caleb smiled, the first genuine smile in years, a slow curve that carried both relief and hope. He descended the porch steps, his boots crunching softly on the forest floor, and felt the earth beneath him in a way he had long forgotten. Solid, real, alive. As he approached the children, he realized that Broken Arrow Ridge, once a place of hiding and shadows, had become a home. Not just for the twins, not just for Ayanna and her clan, but for him. For the first time, Caleb Boone understood that promises kept could carve paths through despair, that courage could be measured not by battles fought alone, but by the lives protected and nurtured. He bent slightly, letting the girl take his hand, the boy following suit, and together they walked toward the ridge, toward a life shaped not by fear or guilt, but by care, responsibility, and the quiet, enduring strength of family. Behind them, the mountains stood timeless, silent witnesses to a promise fulfilled, a past reconciled, and a future ready to be embraced. The wind carried a whisper through the trees, soft but clear, as if the ridge itself acknowledged the new chapter that had begun. A chapter of life, trust, and unbroken bonds. Caleb's heart, long heavy with remorse and solitude, finally felt at peace. And as the sun climbed higher, he understood that the world he had once fled could now be met with steady steps, firm hands, and a heart ready to protect those who needed him most. He had returned from the shadow of the past, and the future stretched before him, vast, uncertain, but alive with promise.